everyone. I was going to say, can you hear me? But the surprise shock on everyone's face, I think, probably confirms my suspicions. So, welcome along, and thank you for coming to the first talk of today, which is my one, supporting the golden thread through product traceability. So, my name is Dan Rossiter. I come from the British Standards Institution. I'm talking to you a little bit about something we have called BSi Identify, but I'll go widely and talk about some other bits and pieces as well. My background is architectural, so don't blame me for anything later on today. But the idea is that, then moved into things like the digital space, and we're trying to combine a few of these things together for what we think is a novel idea that might help solve a few different problems there are in industry. So I want to start off with a simple question. Can you tell what products make up this space? So as long as you don't look towards some of the stands over there where you might be able to see products with their own labels on them, it's actually quite hard. So in fact, all I want you all to do is have a quick look at the ceiling. And you can see, there are some ginormous, what appear to be almost light fittings or something similar. There's all sorts of bits up there, but it's probably very difficult to tell the make and model of those products. Particularly, some of these chairs, you might be able to flip them over and see some sort of label, but when things are installed, when they're in situ, it's actually very hard to determine what that product is, because the packaging's no longer there. Not everything has a label set against it, and the documentation associated with it may not actually be with the product itself. So it becomes a bit of a detective race then to try and work out what's there when you're doing repairs, refurbishments, extensions, other things later on. We'll ignore that for now. Right. Thank you for that. So the idea is that there are lots of different ways you can find this information. Like I said, there'll be product labels. There might be CE markings or UK CA markings as things come up through that actually tell you what the product is. Okay, great. That's some information. You might have declarations of conformity, some third-party certification stuff that might also have some basic information on there. Well, that's useful. I can certainly tell what something is if I have those documents. If you followed some of our lovely standards, and there is something like a homeowner's pack or an O&M manual or something like that, it might have key design information and some handover information in there, which then means that could have in there things like the install guide, user manuals that might help you infer what those products are. So, okay, brilliant. This is getting there. Of course, if you follow CDM properly, there should be a health and safety file, and as part of that health and safety file, there should be information about the as-built, including its plant and equipment. So between the O&Ms and the health and safety file, I should be able to find out what some of these products are. And of course, if you've been following some of the regulatory reform that's going on, there will be a requirement for high-rise residential buildings and relevant buildings in scope to have some form of golden thread as well, which we'll touch on a little later on. So there are lots of places where you might be able to find this information, but probably a more important question is, can you trust it? And the reason I say that is because product information goes through a fairly tortuous journey throughout the life cycle of a project being thought of to actually starting to being used and operated. We start off with manufacturers. Will sit there, they'll build their products, and they'll create literature. There'll be brochures, product data sheets, installation guides, all these different things that they build and develop as part of what they're doing, and then they try and then get that out to designers, specifiers, and others to be aware of such a product. I myself, when I was in practice, I worked for a local authority. So when I was trying to specify products, I wasn't allowed to name anything. It was all public procurement rules. I had to try and coerce the contractor in picking what I wanted by saying, well, I want that particular U value, I want that fire rating, or I want that warranty level, and hope I made a unique concoction that meant that only the product I wanted could be chosen. It never worked. And as a result of that, what happened was then, when the contractor would come back, they'd come back with suggestions. Some might call them, I've lost the word now. Yes, they come up with lots of different substitutions. Some would call it value engineering. That's what I wanted to think of in my head. I personally called it ruining my design. Regardless, there would be what were kind of these authorized substitutions, things that were swapped around that I knew about. The danger, though, was that there are plenty of products that get swapped that people don't know about. The idea of there being counterfeit products or people who go down the builder's merchant and pick up what is available. We know there are issues now with materials and actually getting certain things. So if it's a choice between finishing the job or grabbing something that's basically the same, then we know how direction some people go in. But it might not actually perform in the way you want it to yield the results you want that system to take. Ultimately, then, you want to collate the information at handover to give to the client, the owner, the operator. But, with these substitutions that have taken place, authorized or otherwise, are you actually collecting handover information about the product that went in the building or about what you think went in the building? Which then raises concerns then about operability later on. And ultimately, then, while you're trying to refer to it, how on earth do you find this information out? If I wanted to know what that thing was up there, do I need to go to the NEC's basement, trawl through all these different cardboard boxes and try and find the relevant information from that process? What is the mechanism to actually identifying that product and getting access to the user manuals or the O&M guides or all the other bits and pieces? So it can be quite difficult. And even then, from an accuracy point of view, you might actually be able to get that information and you have it in front of you. And there's a good chance that a manufacturer would have created, lovely databases. They might have very kind of robust PIM systems that have lots of stuff in them, various different data sheets and other things. But others produce them as well. The aggregators or the different suppliers and distributors down the supply chain will create their own information, and there's no guarantee that's actually up to date. A manufacturer changes the chemical composition of what they're doing. Has that been filtered down to the distributors and the aggregators? Or are they now actually talking about an old product that's no longer in circulation? And because of that, then, when someone like myself then tries to design or specify it, at least in the old days, it made it very difficult because I received something, but I wouldn't necessarily know if it was from the manufacturer or not. I wouldn't necessarily know if it was up to date or not. As part of that, just because it's got their logo on it doesn't mean it's the most up-to-date brochure or piece of information. So it's very hard to know, even if I've got it, can I rely on it? And ultimately, this leads to potentially decisions being made on poor information. Now, there's a lot out there when it comes to things like BIM and the digital transformation of the built environment that focuses on this idea that better information leads to better decision making. And there's some surveys and research that supports that. There's a very interesting bit of work through Autodesk that talked about the cost of bad data and the bad information on decision making. As you can see here, that the idea is that up to $1.84 trillion globally could be attributed to bad data being used on projects, and a lot of that resulting in rework, where someone has to go in and actually fix a problem that's been installed in the first place. That's clearly not that great. And when I looked at some of the contributors to it, they saw it was things like actually getting the wrong data, having data that's missing, or it's being inaccurate in the sense that it was there, but it wasn't finite or had that level of accuracy enough to do that, which led to people making these bad decisions. And what happens is the way this costs money is that it gets into errors. If you've not seen it, there's some brilliant work by the Get It Right initiative, GIRI, and they do lots of research, and this is some of the bits that's come out of it, where they've actually looked at where errors come from on construction projects. And if we kind of go in a sort of clockwise way, typical things like poor contractual arrangements and skill issues, that's fine, but you'll notice at about 4 o'clock-ish, we've got information overload. Too much information being in front of people, actually not being able to make the right decisions. This idea then that actually, as you go down towards 6 o'clock-ish, you've got ineffective communication between design teams. And actually, as part of that, you can't give people the right information in a clear and concise way. Problems happen. You've got poorly coordinated design information. As it goes up, late design changes, all these sorts of things happening. So it's clear that if we don't have that right information about products, it then cascades into causing errors, which leads to costs, complexities, delays, and those sorts of things. And then to try and give a real example for these things, I tend to Google and look for a funny news story because, why not, in these sorts of ways. And the best one I could find was university building down in Plymouth, where they were installing 900 windows, and they realised a bunch of them were being installed the wrong way around. Now, Windows shouldn't be put in the wrong way. I mean, I thought the handle would probably be a giveaway, perhaps, but you also don't know how it might affect the performance of the building. You know, there are certain seals and stuff put on windows so that you can actually exit water out of the building. If there's some driving rain, would it push it back into the building? How does it actually affect things? So while these things can be silly at times, they also can have fairly serious implications on a building. And, you know, thankfully this was spotted. What about all the mistakes that weren't spotted on this building and what impacts they might have? You know, and that's just those sorts of products. As I mentioned, there's counterfeits. Approximately 3% of products sold globally are counterfeit. And when you look through the stats of goods seized, because you can't get a stat of how many products are counterfeit, because funnily enough, no one declares their products are counterfeit. But in terms of goods that have been seized and checked, you know, 5% of that 3% is relating to machinery. Then you have plastics, and then you have manufactured articles. And, you know, that's where a lot of our products will sit in terms of that process. I'm sure some of you have seen those short sort of TikTok sort of videos of bricks where people can grab them and like twist on them and they just fall apart and turn to dust. And those sorts of things. There's so much counterfeit problematic things out there that it's really hard to trust what you're seeing. And this is where we've tried to help. There's a concept out there in the world you may have seen sometimes called Digital Object Identifiers, or DOIs. Anyone here read academic papers? A couple of you. If you read academic papers, you might see under the title, near the names, there might be DOI with a bunch of numbers next to it. It's effectively a unique but persistent identifier for that paper. It's used a lot in the academic industry. It's used by an organization called Crossref, who do it for lots of academic papers. And we were looking at this idea of, what if we could use that for building products? And this idea that you could actually associate a unique, persistent identifier to products, so you can tell what that product is for the lifetime that it's actually in a building or in a piece of infrastructure. And the idea is that these things can be assigned to any sort of entities, like those sorts of things. They can be expressed also as URLs. So you can manage them in the back end. I'll get onto the clever bits later on, but this idea is that with these things, you can use them, stick them into a browser, and then get access to that information, which is pretty good. And there are a number of different sectors that use them. And here are a couple of examples. What I'm about to talk about in a minute, publishing and then the entertainment industry. So almost every TV show or film has a digital object identifier. And I'm going to focus on one of my favorites for a second to show off some features. I'm going to talk about Little Shop of Horrors. So it's a weird tangent. It's only 2 minutes. Bear with me. Who's seen Little Shop of Horrors? Lots of you. Brilliant. Classic film. Did you see the happy ending or the real ending? Some chuckles, so people know what I'm on about. That's fine. There are a couple of different endings for Little Shop of Horrors. I remember getting the DVD, loving it as a child, but it always had the happy ever after ending. I went to see it in the theatres. I was shocked to then see that the plant wins in the end. Spoilers. But there are multiple different endings for this thing. And then I looked it up on the DOI system, and you can find the film, you can get there, and it has this unique persistent reference to what it is, but there's also relationships, and it has in there all the different versions of the film. So it has things like where it's been made for aeroplane kind of aspect ratios for the back of airplane seats, or other bits and pieces. And then, being someone who enjoys the film, I know that the later editions had the director's cut special ending to it. So this little one with B6 FFT on it towards the end. So when you go to that version, as you see the numbers at the end, B6 FFT, director's cut with alternative ending. So it actually has relationships between those things. Now what we've done, and the reason why I've diverted onto this bit, is that we've done the same thing with construction products, where you can have relationships between products in the same way that you can have relationships between versions of these films. So actually, if you have products that are longer, thicker, parts of assemblies, those sorts of things, this system can allow relationships between those things in the same sort of way. Crossref are the ones who do academic papers and capture those sorts of things. We've used that same situation for all of our standards. If you've ever read, bought, subscribed, viewed, stolen off the internet a British standard, it has a DOI. And what you can do is you can actually go to and find it and look at it. This is in particular my favourite British standard. It's all to do how to do really good technical drawings and those sorts of things. But you can go to the page, it gives you links on where to buy it, but it also tells you about historical historical versions. It tells you that there is actually an instance for earlier versions of that. And in the same way, we can do this with construction products, where a product gets registered on the system, and in 5-10 years later, it's iterated, it's improved, it does new things. We can record historical versions of those products against different object identifiers, meaning that in 50 years later, when you're looking it up, you're not looking at the new version you can buy now, you're looking at the one that was installed into your building or your piece of infrastructure. So there are lots of different technologies that can be used in here to use these things. And the idea is this is what BSi Identify is. It's a registration service. It lets someone register construction products in the same way. They get a unique identifier. We call ours the UPIN as part of that. And what you can do is you can associate product information to that UPIN, and you can associate rich media to it. I'm not talking, just make, model, manufacturer. I'm talking about links to documents, videos, and those sorts of things. And you'll have a look at one in a second. But the idea is that you get access to this information because it's associated, which allows you to do two things. The first is it allows you to unambiguously identify that product. You can be there, and as long as that identifier is on or associated to the product, you can say, is it one of these or is it one of those? And you can find out immediately. The second thing you can do is you can get to information about that product that the manufacturer controls and manages, which is a real benefit in that way. And one of the things is this word persistent, which I'm going to hover on for a second. It really, truly persists. With some of these things, you might talk to a manufacturer, go, yeah, it's fine. We've got our own unique ID system. Just trust what we've got. But what happens when that company is bought or they go out of business? They won't maintain those sites. The fact that we maintain it as British standards means it can survive for the lifetime beyond those manufacturers. And because of the fact that we're part of the DOI Foundation, there's a little club of us, like Crossref and these other people. If somehow British standards no longer existed, they would look after it on our behalf. So it's truly going to live beyond the manufacturer, beyond British standards, and it's going to keep being maintained and persisted. And I don't know if any of you have had this problem, because I get it all the time. You save clever links you want to use on the internet, and then in 12 months later, you try and use that link and it breaks. Link rot is a real problem on the internet. What this does is that it effectively has an ability to manage it in the back end. So the UPIN will stay the same, but we can change the links behind it to point to different things in the future. So there's a whole management system behind it, a bit like using Bitly, if you ever use that, or one of those URL shortening tools. So it has these extra clever bits to it. And interestingly, I was doing one of these presentations a couple of weeks ago, and there's a demo of the UPIN, and some of it had an error underneath it. And all the questions afterwards, because it was all done on chat, were, why is this big red X and all these errors? And it's because one of the links are broken. But what happens is the tool allows you to go back and say, excuse me, Mr. Manufacturer, this link to your brochure no longer works. Can you go and correct it? Which means then they can go back, fix it, and maintain those links to make sure that access is available. It allows us to spot when these things break. Now, there are different ways it can be used. The first is it can be used digitally. You can just get the UPIN, stick it into a web browser, and you get there. Easy peasy. But the real exciting, clever bit is the physical link. Is the fact that what you can do is have it written or marked on a product, have it as a QR code, an NFC, an RFID, all sorts, which means that you can actually be physically next to or with the product and find that information out. And to show you how easy that is, have a go of getting your phones out and see if you can scan this for me. This isn't an official one. I kind of use a free website to make this for my presentation, but hopefully it should be as easy as getting your phones out, going onto your camera app. We all know that the real winner of the pandemic has been the QR code. You see it everywhere these days. It's in every restaurant. Everyone knows how to use it. Quick little scan. You should just be able to pop onto a page. Can I get some thumbs up if that's worked? Brilliant, thank you. So with no training, with no experience, it's taken less than a minute, and you have now got access to a particular construction product immediately. In this instance, it's a side-rise product. So as part of this, actually having some sort of cavity barrier system as part of that. And what happens is that in the side-rise example, this QR code goes on their packaging. So as it goes off and then arrives on site, you could scan it to make sure it's the right product that's coming in. As the installers have put it in, they can scan the packaging to make sure that what they're putting is being put in the right place. It can be checked against schedules and bills of quantities, and then you could be assured that what you have is the right product in that situation. For those of you who didn't get your phone out, just so you have an idea, what it has is some basic information. It tells you it's a SideRise product. It tells you it's currently available, which is useful if you wanted to get any more of it. It tells you that the record's complete and that all this data is managed by SideRise. We're not in there in the back end moving stuff around. It's their page that they manage as part of this process. So if they want you to see something, they can put it up there. And at the same time, it's giving you some useful manufacturer's information, and it's giving you access to these sorts of resources. And you'll see on that actual page, you can click through and get to the product data sheets. You can get to the safety data sheet, the installation videos. So you are within 2 clicks of getting real useful resource that you could need on a building site, or if you're trying to specify the product, or if you're actually trying to look at whether this product suits your needs from a design point of view. Now, as part of that, it's very helpful in that way, and you can have all sorts of different things on there. These just happen to be the resources that SideRise have put up for this product itself, in terms of that way. But you can imagine, how convenient that could be if you're on the top of some scaffolding, you're on top of a roof, you haven't really able to go down the site hut and check everything. It's immediately available at your fingertips. Now, hopefully this will work. There's a short video that should come up on the next page from Adam at SideRise talking about why it's been helpful. It's only about 3 minutes long. So bear with me, and we'll see if the gods of the internet allow this to happen. If not, I'll tell you what he told me. Right, well, we'll try going backwards to go forwards. Right, I'm abandoning that idea. I'll tell you what Adam told me. It worked perfectly. We tested it earlier. It's one of those classic things. So one of the things that they thought was particularly useful at SideRise was the fact that they were actually getting a lot of technical calls about their products, asking for things like the brochure, the installation videos, and those sorts of things. And what they've managed to do is actually vastly reduce the amount of time they spend dealing with those technical queries, because they're able to point people to the BSi Identify page. The way it works from a commercial point of view is the manufacturers pay for the identifiers for the registration, but to use it, it's free at point of use, as you just saw then on your phones. So the idea is that any customer in that way can just be sent this information and then have an access to it. And where the brochure they might have in their office could be 2 years old and they don't know if it's up to date, the BSi Identify page can be updated to always have the most recent brochure, to always have the most up-to-date third-party certificates, the BBA bits and pieces, all the other relevant information. So it can be that single source of accurate and up-to-date information. As mentioned earlier, they stick it on their packaging. As you can imagine, with these sorts of things, it's very hard. You can't exactly peek into the building to see it. So they're using the packaging to show it. And then what you're able to do is put on things like drawings or stick into various schedules that could come with the designs, the U-pins next to them. So as part of the handover information, it can appear as a schedule as part of that wall assembly or similar, which means that people get access to this information, and they're finding it very useful. It's saving them time, money, and effort just in doing so. So, what we've done and what we've tried to do is have something that helps industry do a few things. Now, I'm expecting, considering the nature of today's event, I'm probably not the first, so I won't be the last person to mention Dame Judith Hackett's name. But the idea is that as part of a Building Safer Future review, you might have noticed there was a small reference in there to some research back in 2015. We were working on this with MBS and others to try and see whether we could use DOIs for construction products, and this is the outcome of that research. And the idea is that as part of it, you'll see in things like Building a Safer Future, it talks about this idea of having a consistent labeling and traceability system. It wants there to be in the built environment some consistent way of doing this. Now, in reality, this is quite difficult because there are an awful lot of identifiers out there. Some I can list off the top of my head. You have things like GS1 have got, for the barcodes, the EAN numbers. If you're dealing with some product libraries like Luckins or something like that, they have their own numbers as well. But the difficulty is that there isn't one system that all products use. And we're not trying to be that system. I'm not going to suggest that. But what we're able to do is we're able to record the other systems people are also on, which means as part of getting onto our page, if someone happens to be on Luckins or in Barber Index or have an EAN number, manufacturers can put those in there. So we act as a node, as a connector as part of that process, meaning people can see where those links are, have links out to those sites, and get access to that sort of information, which means that there is a consistency, at least in being able to crisscross between these different pieces. Looking at things like the construction product regulations, it calls for this idea of a unique identification code. It wants there to be a unique way that products are identified. Now, working on a construction project, typically the designer or the constructor might give their own unique references, and then the building owner will put their own asset IDs on things, so things will have multiple IDs anyway as part of this process. But if a product happens to have a UPIN, could that be the tag that gets used by the contractor? Could it be what the asset manager uses as the unique ID at the same time, which means then on the little labels next to things, you've got it, which means you can access that information and get straight to it. It doesn't need to be, but are those convenience bits there that could help out in that process? I also mentioned at the very start this idea of the golden thread. Through the Hackett review and all the changes suggested, we are going through what, to be honest, is the largest regulatory reform we've seen for the built environment. We've not seen anything like it before. And things are changing. And we know that if people are going to be building higher risk buildings, buildings above 18 meters and other relevant buildings in scope, there's going to be a need to have, maintain and develop a golden thread. And by that I mean closely akin to the BRAC definition of this idea of key information relating to building safety that is developed throughout the design and construction process and then maintained in a digital record for operators, maintainers, and also key stakeholders like emergency services and other people. So there needs to be access to this information. And when it starts to talk about some of the details, bear in mind it's draft, it's still under development, it's talking about details of things like the facade system, wall attachments, roof sheeting, and it wants details about the materials and other bits and pieces. So it wants quite a lot of information. Now, do you want to pull all of that information together, or will it be possible and maybe a lot easier to reference a schedule of UPINs that talk about these products, and then in one click you've got those details as part of that process? Something like a side rise system would certainly form part of the facade system in that sort of way. And actually, could this be a convenience tool to help build these things together? Interestingly, we've been talking to a number of house builders, and they're looking at this as a way of actually compiling things like the homeowners packs. And that instead of having all these details in a warranty box or similar, you have these QR codes that people can use their phones to get to that information. It's the same information, it's just a more convenient way of accessing it. I recently bought a home, I won't tell you from who, but my box is about that thick and I still haven't read it. But actually, having the useful QR codes might mean I actually get to the right things at the right time. Information. I think Amanda's on after I am, talking about the CCPI and all that sort of work. We're trying to do something that also helps with that, because it also has a similar goal. The CCPI is trying to ensure that product manufacturers and those who kind of distribute those products are providing clear, accurate, and up-to-date information. So we think that using this system actually helps with some of those clauses. As part of doing CCPI, Clause 4 asks you to provide documentation related to compliance. We can put on there, on BSi Identify, things like clash reports, things like third-party certification, things like the actual test videos for when things have gone through their actual tests themselves. We can upload those and have those associated, which means people have access to that information. It helps you achieve Clause 4. The idea about characteristics. Now, I'll be honest, we're not trying to be a product comparison website. You can't go on there, type in flow rate or type in a fire rate in, type in FT30 and get everything that suits those products. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to tell you if it's product A or product B. The manufacturer, however, can upload things like product data sheets so you get access to those characteristics. It's under their control, they manage it, and it's in a structure that they want it to be in. Which also means then we can play nice with people like Barber, Luckins, and others who provide that sort of service. But it means that through our system, you get information relating to those characteristics. Ultimately, it's about making product information available, and also a key part is actually having details for a technical helpline. As you saw on the page, you're able to get things like the phone numbers and details for someone like SideRise in that situation as part of that process, which means that we're able to help with a number of these clauses. It doesn't mean if you use it, you'll get there. Far from it. It needs to be done properly, robustly, and you need to think about the suitability of it, but it's potentially a way to meet those requirements as well as the other conveniences it provides as part of that process. So we're hoping not only does it meet regulations and some legislation bits, it also helps people meet what are going to be key USPs for manufacturers going forwards to show that their information can be used and can be trusted. Now, thinking about this product journey, this idea now is that instead of literature being provided that's potentially out of date, the idea is that through something like BSi Identify, by giving out that QR code, that literature could be updated, and then all people have to do is keep going to the same place to get the most recent version of that information. Someone like myself as a specifier, instead of me then having to look at old out-of-date material, guess, ring the manufacturer to find out the product's no longer commercially available, have awkward conversations where they try and sell something to me for a couple of hours where I really want to know what colors it comes in. That's happened to me at least twice. The idea then is that through these literature that I've received, I can go onto this site to find out, yes, it is available, and get these resources I want without having to go through those awkward commercial conversations if I don't want to have them, particularly if I'm working the public sector and can't really engage in that sort of conversation. As a manufacturer, I then have a unique identifier that tells me where the product is. It gives me links to the manufacturer, and then when things arrive on site, I can check things are arriving, actually have that reference on them to help avoid counterfeiting and to ensure that I'm getting the right products, and also ensure that my installers are installing the right products in the right places. When I'm collating my handover information, it means that now, instead of putting this much paper into a binder, I can now provide QR codes that reference that product, saving me time, saving trees, and saving just general effort, and moving into a more kind of digital native place, which, to be honest, is where more people want to live in at the moment. And ultimately then, when I'm in operation, it makes it easier for me to find out what some of these products are. And we can do that through BSi Identify. Now, I asked you at the start of this presentation what products make up this space. Hopefully, with something like BSi Identify, that question is a little easier to answer. Thank you.